have a fair number. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Thank you for joining us at this section of the 3 days webinar series on the ISSB Sustainability Disclosure Standards. This section is the telecoms sector. Just finished a sector on the oil and gas. So we're going to have this section now in the next 1 hour. Just before we start the session, first of all, I welcome you and thank you for joining us. My name is Antonia Ame. I know you'll be seeing Tino Adeawe at the name, but that's not my name. I can't bear that name. I have to, we had some technical glitches, and so I have to use her laptop for this moment briefly. So again, I'm going to be the MC for this session. And before we start off now, I'll call on Dr. Ihiai Anyahara, who is the Director of Directorate of Accounting Standards, Public Sector Financial Accounting Council, Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria, to give us his brief remark.
Thank you, Antonia. I won't make the mistake to call it Tino, no matter what you are using. I know you to be Antonia. And thanks everybody for finding time to join this webinar. This is the third in the series. We commenced yesterday and is driven just by the need to build the necessary capacity for the much awaited IFRS S1, S2, which different sectors of the economy will be expected to implement once they are released. The Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria takes capacity building as very, very important to ensure seamless implementation of the standards. And that's why we are collaborating with the International Sustainability Standard Board, the issuers of the standards we will be implementing, and the NGX that has most of the big entities listed on their floor. So we are partnering to ensure that we in Nigeria get first-hand knowledge about the sustainability reporting, especially through Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. We welcome you and assure you that this is just the first. We'll have many more that will come to enable us build the necessary capacity. I assure you of the caliber of the resource people we have, and I know at the end of the program you will attest to the quality. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy the presentation. Once more, thank you. God bless.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where in the world you are. I can assure you that Antonia and I are not trying to confuse you. My name is Tino Adeawe. I'm the CEO of NGX Regulation. And because of technical glitch, that's why you're seeing her name saying my name. Welcome to this session. It's a real pleasure to be in a position to host a session like this with the FRC and for SASB and the ISSB. There's been a lot of very good, high quality information shared already, and it's very exciting that we're now talking specifically to the telecom sector. I think we're all aware of how the telecom sector has really come up, and also about the adjacencies, the whole ecosystem around the telecom sector. And so speaking to folks that are directly in the sector and all the people that support the sector that ultimately need to be concerned about sustainability and be reporting on sustainability, I think is very important. I think the other thing is that if we view this from the lens of accessing capital, and the telecoms industry being a very capital intensive industry, I think it's very important that preparers in that industry take very seriously these issues around sustainability reporting and ensuring that they do everything that they need to do to be ready to apply the standards whenever that time comes. And so this is the first in a series of capacity building sessions that will be held once the standards are released later on in the month. And I think Ndidi will be telling you a little bit more about that. And I just urge everyone to listen attentively and to please use the opportunity to ask questions. We will also make the questions from all the sessions available as FAQs on different websites, and also make them available to attendees thereafter. So welcome, and thank you very much to the FRC, the SASB, and the ISSB for these sessions. Thank you very much. I'll now call on Ndidi, who is the ISSB, who is an ISSB board member, to speak. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tinu. Thank you so much to NGX and FRCN for hosting this and for anchoring this. I think we received a lot of questions really about the industry metrics in particular and about the SASB standards. So it's great to actually kick off capacity building ahead of the launch of S1 and S2 at the end of this month with an insight into the industry metrics. Our thinking behind that, SASB is part of the IFRS Foundation body of knowledge. And as you know, the IFRS Foundation is issuing S1 and S2 as the first two standards in the establishment of a global baseline for sustainability reporting, which is a response to the call globally to create one global baseline for sustainability reporting with the intention of reducing the ease and the cost of reporting and capturing sustainability related and climate related, in the first instance, risks and opportunities as part of sustainability related disclosures in financial statements. When the standards do come out at the end of the month, we're hoping that you will find those as well, with their illustrative examples and with their guidance, also sources of learning and capacity building, and that you will find in there as well, just like the SASB industry metrics are intended to be, elements of proportionality that allow for these standards not just to be used, very importantly, by the telecommunications sector, but also for the smaller entities in its value chain to allow for more transparent disclosures, and also disclosures that are suited to the level of preparedness of the entities, and thereby, as Tinu has rightly stated, actually unlock capital flows. So sit back. It's a great pleasure to invite our tour now to give us an overview of the first day, and then Sam to deep dive into the metrics for telecommunications.
Thank you, Ndidi, and thank you, FRCN and NGX, for the platform to speak about the SASB standards to Nigeria and other African jurisdictions that are joining us today. So I don't want to take much time because, of course, we have Sam to talk about telecommunications. So I'll just be brief in telling you some high-level summary points from yesterday's session. Yesterday, we had a 2-hour session on ISSB S1 and S2, and then we dove a little bit deeper into the origins and value proposition of the SASB standards. So the first few takeaways from that first part of the session yesterday have to do with the ISSB and the upcoming S1 and S2 publications that, as Ndidi has said, will be published at the end of this month. The main takeaways from yesterday's session are that since its inception, the ISSB has been building upon the work and the principles, concepts, and indicators of existing voluntary frameworks and standards, including the TCFD recommendations, the integrated reporting framework, and of course, the SASB standards that we're here to talk about today. We will be releasing our two first standards at the end of the month. The first one is IFRS S1, which is a general requirements documents. And the SASB standards play a very important role in that document because they are referenced as as priority material to identify sustainability-related risks and opportunities that can impact a company's ability to create value. Our second document is IFRS S2, and this is the climate disclosure standard. And this document is accompanied by industry-based illustrative guidance, which incorporates the climate-related metrics from the SASB standards. So again, both documents use the SASB standards predominantly in their design. Finally, the fourth point during the first portion of yesterday's session was a very important call to action for companies getting ready to prepare disclosures for S1 and S2. And that recommendation was to start using and adopting the SASB standards, because any effort done today to adopt the SASB standards will be a benefit in the implementation of S1 and S2. Then we had a separate 1-hour session specifically on the SASB standards. And here you also see 4 key takeaways from that 1-hour session. Basically, the most important takeaway is that the SASB standards were designed to help companies identify sustainability topics on an industry-by-industry basis that are reasonably likely to affect the financial condition, operating performance, or risk profile of a company. Currently, the universe of SASB standards is comprised by 77 different standards for the same number of industries. And each one of these standards includes disclosure topics and accounting metrics that are designed to provide investors with decision-useful information on how a company can be affected by sustainability trends and risks and opportunities. As Ndidi hinted earlier on, the SASB standards can be thought of as a proportionality measure, because their design has been created to identify a subset of issues, risks and opportunities related to sustainability that impact a company. So instead of starting your sustainability journeys reporting on 30, 20 issues, the SASB standards on average contain 6 disclosure topics and 13 accounting metrics, which of course makes the reporting process easier. And finally, the last thing that we talked about yesterday was on the implementation side, on the practical side of how to implement the SASB standards. And I just want to remind everybody that we explored the SASB implementation primer yesterday, which is a free online resource that is available for companies around the world to use. And that is, of course, designed to help them implement the SASB standards. So again, a few takeaways before Sam's presentation to set the table on why the SASB standards, what they are and what their role is in S1 and S2. And now I'll hand it over to Sam to walk us through the SASB standards for the telecommunication services industry.
Thanks very much, Arturo and Ndidi, and to our hosts for having us. Really excited to be here. Really looking forward to getting to chat a little bit more about telecommunications. So I am going to share my presentation. And if somebody could just let me know that this actually looks good, that it looks like a presentation, that would be helpful. Oops.
Yes, it's fine.
It does.
Sam.
Great. Okay. So really excited to be here today to talk about the SASB standards, and in particular, the telecommunications services industry. Really important industry in this market, really important market for this industry, given the size of the telecommunications industry in Nigeria, and also the potential for growth in that market and in similar markets over time. So really looking forward to getting into this and also hearing and fielding any questions that you all might have. So as a quick reminder of what Arturo and Ndidi highlighted, the ISSB is publishing S1 and S2 this summer. S1 is the requirements for the disclosure of general sustainability related information, and S2 is the disclosure of climate related sustainability information. Both of these are, especially S1, is a pretty general, pretty high level document. It sets forth the sort of principles for how, where, and when companies should disclose information. It defines what materiality means in this sense. But we know that when we're getting to actually specific disclosures, it's really important to have more specific information. That's both for investors and for preparers who especially those who may be early to the sustainability reporting journey, or figuring out for the first time what exactly they should be disclosing when it comes to sustainability related info. So that's where the industry specific guidance comes in. And that's why both S1 and S2 recognize the value of industry specific disclosures, because industry specific disclosures really allow investors to understand company performance, to genuinely benchmark company performance, and to compare companies to other similar companies in their industry. And we know that that's how companies compare themselves. That's how investors compare companies now. They compare them to similar companies that are working on similar things. And the other value of industry-specific disclosures is it gets at a relatively focused set of information that is truly aligned with the company's core business model. The set of issues that I'm going to talk about today should hopefully be familiar to people on this call. It should hopefully be issues that people are aware of and may already be actually managing or monitoring in some way. So that's a real advantage of the industry specificity is it talks in a language that companies can understand and hopefully can relatively easily understand. So this is where the SASB standards come in. As Arturo highlighted, these were developed with a market-informed due process for 77 different industry standards, and really looking to highlight the sort of key issues that have been communicated from investors and market stakeholders as really most likely to represent key issues with material information in a given industry. It's important to note that, there's 77 industry standards, 77 different industries. The SASB standards are not perfect. There is no two companies are the same, no two markets are the same, no two jurisdictions are the same. That's especially true in the telecommunications services industry. We know that industry looks very different on a jurisdiction by jurisdiction basis. However, we do believe that through this process, the standards have identified a set of topics and a set of issues that is most likely to be of interest to the investors in that industry all around the world, even if some are more relevant in certain markets or certain jurisdictions than others. So now I'm going to dive into the technology and communications sector, and then further into the telecommunications services industry. So the way that SASB has divided the industries according to its taxonomy is it's putting telecommunications services inside the technology industry. There's a separate standard for media and entertainment for those that are actually producing the content that flows through telecommunication services. So that's in a different sector. But today we're going to be talking about telecommunications services, and that's part of the technology sector. So the other industries in this sector are electronic manufacturing services, which is companies that develop and manufacture devices. It's hardware services, companies that design devices, usually different from those who manufacture them. Internet media and services industry is large internet-based services like search engines or social media. Then we have semiconductors, we have software, and we have telecommunication services. Once again, to reiterate, these divisions are not perfect. They're designed to represent sort of divisions of which companies are most likely to face different sustainability related risks and opportunities. But there's obviously some overlap between these industries and even in industries in different sectors, like I mentioned, with media and entertainment. Many companies today actually engage in activities that bridge multiple industries or are narrowly focused on a subset of activities within an industry. So all that is to say that these standards are designed to be used either in part or in combination. If you have a business that spans multiple industries, we recommend looking at multiple SASB standards to identify the full set of issues and material information that may be of interest to your stakeholders and to your investors. So now going into the telecommunication services industry, these are the activities that the SASB standard is designed to cover. Again, not every company performs all of these activities, and some may perform others that are covered by other standards. But it's wireline broadband networks that operate through fiber optic cables, traditional voice, and wired internet, cable and satellite television services, which in this industry are often bundled with internet services in certain markets, and then wireless and radio, which are produced through radio-based cellular networks and cellular towers. Within the standard itself, we have 6 different disclosure topics. That's about average for a SASB standard, that number 6. And so I note that that's a relatively small, relatively focused number. It's not a huge universe of information that's being requested by the SASB standard. So within that universe, we have in this standard, it's actually a good one to use as an example because it's a good mix of environmental, social, and governance issues. And so we'll be looking at those kind of one by one and walking through the issues in this standard. So it's environmental footprint of operations, data privacy, data security, product end of life management, competitive behavior in open internet, and managing systemic risks from technology disruptions. And I'll go ahead and touch on each of those briefly one by one and sort of explain why they're in the standard and how, in our experience, investors view and understand each of these topics. So the first topic is an S2 topic, which means it's a climate-related topic. It's the environmental footprint of operations. Pretty straightforward in terms of climate issues, but the telecommunications industry is an industry where energy costs are a relatively high percentage of operating costs. I think it's an average of 5% worldwide. In markets with low grid coverage, providers often must power their own networks in part, and so that number 5% can actually be higher in certain markets. And it's a portion of cost that's expected to grow for 2 reasons. First of all, more and more traffic every day is flowing through networks, telecommunication services networks, especially in markets like Nigeria, where more and more people are coming online and getting more devices and more ways to connect every day. We're really seeing an exponential growth in most markets in the amount of data that travels through cellular networks and cellular and telecommunications infrastructure. Some advances in technology, like the shift from 3G to 4G to 5G, for example, come with energy efficiencies, but they also increase the amount of data that people are able to use and to send through cellular networks. So really, really high of growth in the amount of network traffic in this industry. And then on the other side, we're likely to have increasing supply side costs. And that's a direct function of the sort of the environment around climate change. We know that in the future, energy may become more of a scarce resource. There may be additional regulation on the use of energy and how much energy companies are using. And there's also reputational effects as companies want to cut their carbon footprint and want to go net zero or reducing carbon footprint. That's something that really looks good to consumers, looks good in their markets. And so the telecommunications services industry is really at the front line of both these sort of regulation and reputational effects, because the entire industry uses 2 to 3% of total global energy demand. So a really, really high percentage of the total output of carbon emissions and of energy use in the world makes this industry really on the front lines of environmental footprint. So in terms of what investors are really interested in, it's pretty basic. What's this company's strategy to optimize energy use? How much energy is the company using? And what's its strategy? Does it have a strategy? Is it planning for a potential future with higher network traffic and potentially higher energy costs over time? And how is it preparing for that potential eventuality? If you look down at the bottom of the page here, you have the actual accounting metric for this topic. And again, it's pretty focused. It's just one metric with 3 sort of components: the total energy consumed, the percent grid electricity, and the percent renewable. So pretty focused set of disclosures here. One thing we should note is that for each company, they might have a different sort of set of information that really communicates material information on a topic. We've heard that investors are really interested in additional context. Maybe some of these things are difficult to measure for companies at the moment. Maybe they don't have these numbers immediately and they can't obtain these numbers without undue cost or effort, which is the language used in S1. But it's that's an acceptable. There may be alternative disclosures that a company can do to still sort of get at this information. And we know that that investors are really interested in context. They're really interested in having additional information that helps put the numbers into context so they can understand what they mean. And also it's reasonable sometimes for companies not to be able to have the numbers and to be able to say that, and perhaps to disclose alternative information, an alternative set of metrics, maybe a qualitative metric that helps investors understand their work and their progress on these issues. So our next two topics I'm going to address together. These two topics are sort of more in the social domain of ESG, and it's data security and data privacy. Now, at SASB, we tend to define these as data privacy being the intentional use of data, and data security being the unintentional use of data. So data privacy is, what does the company do with user data? Does it transfer it to third parties for any reason? Under what circumstances? Does it sell customer data? How does it protect it? That kind of thing. Whereas data security is really breaches and cyber attacks and things that threaten the integrity, availability, or confidentiality of company data, of customer data, or of the company's networks. So these two issues are, really top of mind for almost any industry in the world today. Are issues that almost any industry has to deal with, but they are particularly crucial and particularly important in the telecommunications industry for two reasons. First of all, the telecommunications industry handles huge volume of data on, often millions of consumers, and so really large amounts of data that's very attractive for cyber attacks, for hackers, for example. And the second reason is that the sensitivity of that data is very high. We're talking in many cases real-time location data that can also be paired with personal data. So really large quantity of highly sensitive personal data is stewarded by this industry, which making it really kind of unique actually among global industries. So we know that data breaches are something that cost companies, can cost a lot of money, can have very serious reputational impacts if companies are breached and lose large amounts of consumer data. And there also are privacy issues, and these sort of look different again in different markets sometimes, but companies often will sell personal data to third parties, or will transfer it to third parties, like to advertisers, for example, for business reasons. And then there's also situations where governments and law enforcement will request sensitive user data from companies. Again, that happens more in certain jurisdictions than in others. It's more challenging in certain jurisdictions than others, especially where governments are maybe asking for data on dissidents, for example. That happens in certain markets. But regardless, we know that the number of government requests for data and law enforcement requests are only growing worldwide. They're growing at a very fast rate. And we think that, and investors think that, every company that handles the kind of data that telco services handle is going to really have to think about the processes it has in place to respond to these requests, and when it actually might say no to such requests, and what are the sort of risks and opportunities with that, between protecting its users and protecting its privacy, and obviously complying with the law and complying with the jurisdictions in which it operates. So data privacy, we'll go, these are separate topics, but data privacy, we have 4 accounting metrics here, 1 qualitative and 3 quantitative, to help sort of give context. Once again, these might not be the precise metrics that are most useful to each company, but these are the ones that investors have identified as most likely to be helpful to understand this issue. And investors are really interested here in understanding the overall approach to collecting and managing data, and really what are the circumstances under which a company will transfer user data, will use it for secondary purposes. Some secondary purposes are less sort of risky than others, like for example, to improve its products or maybe to sell adjacent products. You know, but all of these things can have privacy implications and can really affect the brand and reputation of the company, because consumers trust companies with their data, and they don't necessarily like to see their data being sold or used by third parties who are contacting them, for example. So really something that sort of gets at you know, brand issues and also obviously regulation. Data security is rather a challenging topic to sort of communicate through sustainability disclosures. But we do know that investors are really interested in having more information on data security besides what's in a company's sort of balance sheet, and that it's seen more and more as a critical thing for investors to really understand about a company and about their risks and opportunities. So investors in this case are most interested in sort of what's a company's approach to identifying and manage and addressing risks. You know, how does it manage its data security? Does it use a commonly accepted or market leading framework for managing its security services, like the ISO framework, for example? If so, why does it use that one, and why did it maybe choose that one? What are sort of trade-offs that it faces? What internal processes does it employ? And finally, kind of what's its preparation for these kinds of incidents, which can be really extraordinary incidents. You know, we've seen hacks, at least in certain markets, of telcos that resulted in 20 million, 30 million consumer accounts breached, or sets of personal data breached. So that can have huge implications from reputation and regulatory perspective. So sort of how does a company quantify a large breach like that, and what is it doing to prepare for that? Our next topic is another environmental topic, but it's actually not a S2 topic because it's not so closely related to climate. But this is the problem of e-waste. We know that e-waste is already a really large problem, and one that's going to continue to grow, and we think exponentially in coming years and in coming decades. As you know, the number of devices in the world increases, people are constantly trading up and trading in devices. So really exponential growth of e-waste from personal devices, from business devices, worldwide, and really some pretty serious emerging environmental problems because of that. Electronics are filled with toxic materials that can seep into groundwater, that can harm local communities, for example. And it's telco industries are really kind of a not always, this isn't the case in every market, but in many markets, telcos are really a natural kind of point of contact for running recycling programs and take back programs from devices, because telcos are often partnered with device manufacturers to supply consumers devices. And regardless, they are well positioned to help consumers, get rid of their old device if they're switching to a new one, and to help understand and to help recycle or potentially reuse that device. Another thing that I should note is, in addition to sort of some potential risk here, and the potential for increased risk over time as this area becomes more heavily regulated, there's really a revenue upside here, because electronics also have sensitive, critical, and rare materials in them, like rare earth metals. These devices are in short supply already, and the supply of those materials is not necessarily predictable. It's something that's not necessarily safe to assume that that supply is going to continue. I mean, it could be subject to things like geopolitical concerns, for example. So investors do think that companies that are sort of out ahead of the game and sort of take back programs and recycling programs may be better insulated from those kinds of supply shocks in the future, and can actually help to generate revenue from reusing and recycling devices, and reusing the sort of critical materials within devices. So on this topic, investors are most interested in, what's the scale of a company's program? How advanced is it? And is it kind of growing over time? Is the company trying to recycle or reuse almost all of the devices that come back to it? Is it a smaller percentage? So really trying to understand how robust these programs are and if they're set up within a company. Our next topic is more of this one is really more of a governance topic. And this competitive behavior in open internet really revolves around the ways that telcos use their market power and how they leverage their market power. This is an industry with really high capital intensity, really high CapEx and R&D costs. So that leads to natural consolidation. In many markets, that leads to natural monopolies forming in this industry. So really high sort of risk around kind of anti-competitive behavior, around monopoly behavior. In many markets, it's a heavily litigated or regulated space. There's many markets where telcos have had to pay significant fines or back off on mergers because of anti-competitive concerns. The relationships with governments and with local regulators are really important in this industry. It's very heavily regulated. And then there's also the opportunity for telcos to enter adjacent businesses like financial services or software due to their large networks and their large existing customer bases and their relationships with those customers. So sort of further opportunities for telcos to kind of flex their market power, which again is a set of opportunities, obviously, but also potential risks. And then related to that is a whole set of issues around the principle of net neutrality, which is the idea that internet service providers should treat all data equally and should not favor certain kinds of data. This has been sort of a political movement worldwide. It's stronger in some jurisdictions and markets than others. It is also regulated. Some jurisdictions have very extensive regulations on this, some don't. But it's an issue that's going to, we think, continue to be really important, continue to be important around the world. And there is a likelihood of regulation in many places, even if it doesn't exist today. So that's a potential risk. It's a potential opportunity for companies. And then there's a lot of sort of related kind of business arrangements that telcos can enter into that can help sort of improve businesses or partnerships. So issues like zero rating, which is providing sort of free services to the internet, or paid peering, favoring certain network traffic based on a business agreement. Again, these can be business opportunities. There can be a revenue upside there, but there can also be risk. There can also be risk from a reputational perspective, from regulation. If companies are seen as sort of not respecting the open internet, not respecting the free exchange of information, that can be something that is, or conversely, if they are really good at respecting those kinds of principles, that can be a key sort of brand element for telecom companies. So investors really, I mean, again, this is a heavily regulated set of issues. Anti-competitive behavior has a direct line to monetary implications in many markets and many jurisdictions. So we have a metric on the cost of legal proceedings associated with anti-competitive behavior. So investors are really interested in understanding kind of what are the direct costs that companies face, and how are they sort of managing that risk, and how are they just managing this set of risks and opportunities overall. I would note that this one, probably more than any other topic, really looks different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. I mean, there's just no comparison in the way, I mean, there are comparisons, but very, very different how these issues are regulated or show up in each jurisdiction, in each market. But they're still important everywhere, and they're still important in a way that investors, especially global investors, are interested in understanding the particulars of a specific jurisdiction or a specific market, and how the company is responding to that, and how it's incorporating that into its strategy, into its governance, etc. And then our final topic is another climate topic. So this is another S2 topic because of the really high implications of climate change on the way this sort of issue is managed and monitored So this is risks from technology disruptions, network downtime, outages, service outages, that kind of thing. This is also obviously a business issue in addition to a sustainability issue. And this is really core to a company's sort of business and ability to make money. But it also is a sustainability issue for a couple reasons. Mainly that, unlike, for example, software companies, certain kinds of software, for example, if your services go down or something, it might be annoying, it might be, bad, your client might lose money, but it's not going to cause system-wide disruption. Telco services, connectivity is really critical to the functioning of the economy. It's critical to functioning of sensitive services like emergency services or healthcare. So the loss of telecommunication services, the loss of connectivity can really have huge economy-wide, social-wide implications. And so that's a really kind of heightened set of risks there for telcos if their networks are unreliable or if their networks are damaged. And just to note the importance of climate change here, I mean, obviously part of the issue is, part of the reason why this issue is so important is you have extensive networks, expensive equipment, they're spread over long distances, different kinds of climates and different kinds of terrain, and really sensitive to weather events, sensitive to extreme weather events, which obviously are going to be more common and more unpredictable with climate change. So to the extent that there is some predictability around this issue, I think we're going to see less and less predictability and more sort of challenges for companies to account for the risks and involved with service disruptions. So again, investors are really interested in knowing how companies are preventing and responding to the service interruptions, and what is the sort of level of capital investment and the level of strategy or planning that's going into improving the reliability and quality of its network, especially over time. And so that's the telecommunications services industry. Just a really quick note on sort of the use of this industry standard. Up until SASB was integrated into the IFRS and the ISSB, we had really good uptake on the standard. We had 55 organizations using it, including many of the largest telco companies in the world. But I think that you will notice that most of our reporters are from Asia, Europe, and North America. So that's really a problem. The SASB standards were originally designed to be sort of US centric, and we've been doing a lot of work recently to make these sort of topics and metrics applicable really to global companies equally. So I think we have a lot of work to do to kind of improve our penetration, especially into markets like Nigeria, but would really like to see that number increase, and would really like to hear from folks on this call and to work with the market to understand what we need to do to make this tool usable and really relevant in other markets and jurisdictions. And so these are just a sample of the companies that have been reporters to the telco SASB standard. You can actually see any of these companies, you can see their sustainability report and their SASB report. If you Google SASB reporters, you can actually get directed to any of these companies and see their actual reports. So that's a great way to get started to look and see what another company has done and what they've disclosed. They're not technically S2 reports because these are SASB reports. So some of the formatting might be different, et cetera. But if you're looking to get started on the sustainability reporting journey, download the SASB standard and then go onto the website and see reports from other companies. It can be really helpful to see sort of how they've interpreted the metrics and disclosures. And so again, lots of large companies on here, but we'd really like to see some more Nigerian logos on this slide in the future. So would really be excited to sort of hear more and to work with people on this call to make sure that next time we show this slide, we have some Nigerian telcos that are listed as reporters. And so that's it. We really welcome input, welcome being involved, and please do follow along and be part of the process. We are a market-driven organization, and we can't be experts in every single industry on earth and every single jurisdiction. So we really rely on industry experts and jurisdiction experts to help us sort of continue to evolve and improve this market product. And with that, hopefully if we have time, I'll take some questions.
Thank you, Sam Wallace.
Corey, there's a question in the chat.
Yes, so it's, this is a question and answer section now. I urge you, if you have questions, please put your questions in the chat box so that we can attend to them. So there are a few questions there now. We have, first question, we have, can e-waste be reclassified in circular economy sustainability, having some useful parts that could be reused? Sam?
Yeah, what was the first part of that, I think?
Okay, let me take it again. It says, can e-waste be classified in circular economy sustainability, having some useful parts that could be reused?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think e-waste is actually a really, really critical part of circular economy. I mean, just given the rareness of some of the materials and the potential for harm if we're not better at recycling and reusing devices. So I think that in SASB, it refers to product end-of-life management. But I think that if you, as a company, if you think about that as sort of circular economy and sort of contributions to a circular economy, I think that's absolutely a rationale and a strategy that will make sense to investors and that will resonate with investors.
Thank you. So the second question we have here, the focus in this webinar is telecommunication industry. Can we have a standard that we provide guidelines for a ink cartridges manufacturing company?
That is a great question. This is actually similar to a set of questions that we get a lot because as it turns out, there are more than 77 industries in the world. And I'm frequently saying, you know, can we have a new industry for this? Can we have a new industry for this? I think it's a really reasonable question. And in many cases, we have sort of explored developing additional industry standards. But I'd also say that, you know, if you really look in the body of SASB standards, it's very likely that some of the sustainability issues that you are facing as a business are actually already covered within the standard. In this case, it might be worth looking at the electronic manufacturing services to the extent that it's sort of a technology device. But ink manufacturing actually might belong in sort of a different manufacturing standard. So I can help to try to sort of identify what that would be and work with that. But it's really likely if you do look across the body of SASB standards that we're covering sort of similar business activities in an industry standard.
If I may add something else to that answer, Antonia. Developing standards is a long process. For example, the development of these telecommunication standards took over a year, almost 10 years ago. So of course, developing a new set of industry standards takes time. And that's exactly why some of the answer that would serve these person now is to look at other standards, like Sam said. He mentioned electronic manufacturing, hardware might be another, and there's also some elements of remanufacturing topics in the industrial machinery and goods sector. So these standards, we chose 77 industries that would make a good representation of the economic activities of jurisdictions worldwide. This doesn't mean that they're perfect, like Sam said, and there may be some instances where a company doesn't see itself fit squarely into one industry standard. But the recommendation there is to look at other standards and see what topics and what metrics might be useful for disclosure to investors.
Yeah, thanks for that addition, Arturo. That's spot on, and I agree that industrial machinery and goods might be the first place to start. And this is also something we need to figure out with the ISSB in terms of our work plan, is how do we keep improving these standards? Definitely something that we're still have under kind of discussion.
Okay, so quickly to the next question. Any thoughts on achieving a balance on preservation of large wildlife that is threatened with extinction vis-a-vis such animals' ability to damage equipment and cause technology disruptions?
That's a great question. And the answer is actually no. This isn't an issue that I have encountered before in the markets that I've looked at. I can definitely understand how this could be an issue in certain markets. So I do think that the standard, again, it's a template, it's a guide. It's not going to cover every material or sustainability issue that your company might face. But I would be really interested to know how people are reporting on this and how people end up producing disclosures on that issue. If it really is material in the jurisdiction, be really interested in taking a look and seeing how companies are disclosing about that, because I can definitely see that being a very interesting and relevant issue, especially along sort of like the biodiversity lines and given the infrastructure of telco. So appreciate that question. That's a really good question.
If I can just throw in something on that as well, just very briefly, just the fact that there's an RFI out, actually, the IFRS published a request for information on future standards. Obviously, we've published the first two standards, S1 and S2, but there is a request for information for future research topics, which include biodiversity, human capital, and human rights to that, and also to some extent actually addresses the circular economy question that was raised. So please take a look at that request for information, and please do respond and provide your input, because it's your input that will be used to help set future standards that the IFRS Foundation will be publishing.
Thank you, Dr. Gidi, for that addition. The next question, will it be okay for a company to focus on the 6 disclosure areas for the purpose of reporting?
That's another really good question, something that we get a lot. I think the answer is that's not up to us to determine. Like we said, every company is different, every industry is different, every market is different, and it really is up to the company to review resources like the SASB standards to determine for themselves what are their key sustainability related risks and opportunities, and what is material information to disclose. Having said that, the SASB standards are a market tested tool to provide investors with a full set, ideally, of sustainability related information. So I think that it's certainly a very good start, although we can't say that that's the only thing that is going to be sufficient for every company. And the last thing I would add to that is one other important addition in IFRS S1 and S2 are the in S2 has some additional climate related metrics like scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions, with certain caveats, based on materiality and a company's ability to collect that information. And then also the TCFD structure, which is the sort of 4 pillars of governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. So all that is to say that we can't say exactly that this is, the sort of comprehensive set of information, but it's a really good start. And I think it can help to sort of get at all of those other issues that you're looking at for disclosure.
Okay, the next question. How will heavy metals in e-waste disposal be managed and effects on environments?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. And I think that's part of why we do this work. I think the solution is going to partly come from governments and partly come from markets. And I think that, our piece is helping investors understand how companies are doing and how companies are performing. But yeah, I think that's part of why we're here and doing this work, because, trying to understand really what is best practice and what is the best way for companies to handle that set of risks and opportunities.
Okay, quickly to the last question, hopefully this afternoon. Can you explain the percentage covered under emissions limiting regulations, that's in percentage, as required for disclosure under greenhouse gas disclosure in SASB standard? And then, is this currently applicable to Nigeria?
Yeah, I don't know enough about the Nigerian market to say if this is applicable or not. I will say that in many cases, an appropriate disclosure is to say 0 or to say this isn't applicable in this market because maybe such regulations don't exist in this market. So, you know, that's a reasonable thing to disclose, and that's something that is of interest to investors, and especially to global investors if they're looking, you know, at companies across different markets. You know, because the expertise kind of comes from companies on the ground there. So yeah, I don't know the exact answer to that, but it might be that it's not relevant.
Yeah, and if I may add something that indeed
I mean, what's worth mentioning there is the greenhouse gas protocols requires disclosure. Go ahead, Arturo.
Oh, sorry, Ndidi. I think our audio was overlapped. I was just going to add something regarding something that you hinted earlier, that we do have a request for information out there on the improving the international applicability of the SASB standards. So we as a standard setting team have identified certain metrics within the SASB standards that need some fixing in order to be more internationally applicable. And we have posted our methodology out there so that the market, companies, investors, regulators, etc., can comment on how we're thinking about improving the international applicability of these metrics. And this might be a case where our metrics need some fixing for them to be applicable to jurisdictions like Nigeria.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. Ndidi, you wanted to add some more context?
Regarding greenhouse gas protocols, I mean, these have been strongly referenced by S2, which will be published. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So just scope 3, which is a big concern for many companies, and of course, telecommunications companies as well. And again, S2 is supposed to be a global baseline. So it is quite comprehensive. And what it does is it does provide transitional relief for the first year in reporting or disclosing scope 3. I just thought it was important to mention that, also in terms of highlighting that there are significant transitional reliefs and proportionality measures that are in scope in S2, and that S2 is intended to be quite comprehensive and does reference the greenhouse gas protocol in that regard. I know to what extent that helps you with that question, and very curious also to hear further questions after you've actually read S2. And just to back up Arturo, please do go on the website and look at the request for information, both on the international applicability of the SASB standards, which is intended to make them more internationally applicable, and also on the future standards that are going to be written. This is so, so, so important that, you know, Africa's voice, and I know we have Nigerians on, and I know we have other countries from the African continent also on this platform. It's so important that we get your feedback, that we get your input, also specifically on the telecommunications metrics going forward. The whole idea is to serve you and to make sure that whatever metrics are published are better suited across all jurisdictions and also across all preparers, large and small, which incorporates your value chains and supply chain also. Our hope is that this will really reduce and ease the cost and burden of sustainability reporting disclosures and enable them to be more strongly connected to the financial statements. And that in turn will actually help build more resilient companies by mitigating and identifying risks, but also opportunities going forward. I think this is a good time probably to call on our hosts, Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria, NGX, and to thank you. Honestly, it's been great attendance. And thank you, Sam, for an absolutely excellent session, very insightful. And thank you, Arturo, for anchoring us.
Doc. All right. I just want to say thank you very much to everyone for attending. The sessions continue tomorrow. We continue to have additional sector-specific sessions, financial services, and then consumer goods tomorrow. Food and beverage and consumer goods as the second session tomorrow. And just to say a big thank you to Sam and to Arturo, of course to Ndidi for sharing knowledge with us today, and to say that this is going to continue. And I don't know whether I've mentioned it on this session. We're going to have FAQs, so we'll curate the questions that have been answered and that were asked, and provide answers to them that will be available on different websites, including the NGX Group website and the FRC website going forward. Thank you very much, and have a pleasant evening for those in Nigeria and on West African time, and for those in other jurisdictions, good morning and good evening. Good evening. Thank you. Dr. Anyahara.
I'm always here with you. You have said it all. I just appreciate everybody for the patience and understanding. I'm looking forward for tomorrow's engagement. Like we did promise, we'll have more of this, and expect that all of us will participate so that Nigeria can have a seamless transition to credible corporate reporting. Do have a lovely evening, day, morning, wherever you are. God bless. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.